Have you ever wanted to discover what's missing in your life? Metaphysics is available to all and is part of your life even if you don't know it. Welcome to Metaphysics, a view through the veil with Barb Crowley. Together we'll explore the mysteries behind metaphysics and how to use it to have a deeper understanding and advantage in life. And now here's your host, Barb Crowley.
Hi, this is Barb Crowley, and welcome to Metaphysics, A View Through the Veil. Today we're talking to Nigel Watson. Nigel has researched and investigated historical and contemporary reports of UFO sightings since the 1970s. He writes a regular monthly column, Saucers of the Damned. That name alone scares me, about UFOs for Fortean Times magazine, and you're a regular contributor to Magnolia. So, Nigel, welcome to the
Hi.
show, and thank you for coming on my show.
Yeah, pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you, and especially about UFOs, because finally the American government, who seemed to shut down in the 60s and
Yeah.
pretend they don't exist,
Yeah.
is starting to admit they do exist. Got pressured in, I think. But you definitely researching from the 70s. I mean, this is 55 years.
Yeah, a bit frightening, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I did kind of have a bit of a break in the 90s, and then I kind of got back into the subject sort of early this millennium. So
Yeah. Why'd you
uh,
take a break? Why? I mean, because there was
but,
still activity quite a bit, I
yeah,
know, in the
well,
United States in the late 90s.
Well, in the late 90s, there's the X-Files, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about the subject. And
Yeah.
lots of magazines came out in Britain, like newsstand glossy magazines. But in 1994, I got married and started having children, and we
Oh,
moved
okay. Yeah.
and we moved from London to Plymouth, so there's a lot of other things going on. So although I was sort of doing a bit of reading and a little bit of writing, um, I wasn't doing so much as I did in the past. I think also you've got to remember 25 years ago, there was no internet like now.
Hmm.
You can write things and email them off as an attachment and see all the latest things on a daily basis. Whereas
Yeah.
back then, I had a little portable typewriter and it was a bit more,
Yeah. Harder.
pre-digital, really. Yeah. So you have to make a bit more effort, I think. There was
Hmm.
no copy and pasting or anything like that. And I suppose in a way it was good to have a bit of a break from the subject because I think it can get a bit intense. I think if it's like any subject, if you get involved with it too long, it can get a bit oppressive, and it's nice to have a different perspective.
Right.
And
Step
you know,
away for a bit.
yeah. But then it's funny then in the beginning of this century, the subject sort of went downhill a lot. I think a lot of people expected something to happen,
Hmm.
at the end of the 20th century,
Right.
and nothing really happened. And there was all this fear of the computer bug, aircraft were going to fall from the sky and
Oh
everything
yeah,
was going to go.
yeah. Y2K. We had a
And
fabulous party on Y2K.
all right.
Well, we did think there was a possibility that
Yeah,
everything was shutting down, and
yeah,
there was a
yeah,
possibility.
yeah. They said
Nobody knew. Nobody
all
knew.
the computers would go, aircraft computers would go, and everything, and
Hmm.
basically nothing happened.
Right. Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
God.
thankfully. But I think after that, people were saying, in terms of ufology, is it dead? Nothing, because there'd been all that enthusiasm about the subject, and I think
Hmm.
by then the X-Files TV program, I think it finished about then as well. So in a way, it kind of ran its course, and
Right.
then people were saying, what's happened to ufology, and people were kind of giving up a bit on it, and then like you say, at the moment, there's a lot of government interest in the subject. And the last sort of well, I got back into it properly, say about 20 years ago. And from there, I've been regularly writing on the subject.
Hmm.
And I think I've been lucky, though, in the last 4 or 5 years when I've been writing regularly for Fortean Times, that there's been so much news from America, which um, is mainly due to Congress being pressured to look at UFO cases and to
Right.
investigate them. But also, this has meant more interest from, like, NASA's got its own UFO study now, and there's a lot of civilian groups setting up, and groups of scientists are setting up. And
Hmm.
I don't necessarily agree with a lot of these organizations that are cropping up everywhere, because then it sort of spreads the whole subject over a wider field, really, and it'd be good
Right.
if it was more concentrated. But I suppose different organizations have different goals and objectives. Like NASA, I think, is more geared towards detecting any rare phenomenon rather than investigating old cases. And I
Mhm.
think they're more interested in sort of, physical objects that we can actually track or, photograph. And I think there's quite a lot of organizations that are building sort of UAP detectors so that we can swiftly video or photograph or detect the presence of any strange objects. But from the last time I read about it, a lot of these detectors pick up birds and aircraft and, insects and different things.
Right. Right.
They are a bit prone to setting off, false readings. So I think they've got to be refined. And I think the problem is um, UFOs, just by their nature, can be very elusive. I think some people think there might be some rare, atmospheric phenomenon, which is, possible, but that doesn't really relate to, say, alien abductions or, high strangeness cases that I deal with in my book.
Hmm.
So there's lots of different strands to the subject, really.
Hmm. There are. There are. In fact, and while you were talking, I thought, oh, I want to ask about that. I want to talk about, and now I've gone blank. So let me go back a little bit. You said most of your investigation, although you're talking about the U.S., but you talked about Northern England,
Yeah.
and is Northern England a hot spot?
Yes, I think it is, and it's continued to be so
Why
up to
is
the
that?
present day. I'm not really sure. I think partly there's a lot of towns and cities in that area, so
Hmm.
we're all, there's a lot of a big population, and also there's the Pennines and Ilkley Moor, and a lot of, wild landscape, which is fairly remote.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of not physically remote, but they do feel remote. And, there's a lot of that sort of rugged countryside. So I think it's a combination of having populations that can visit these places,
Yeah.
and that and they have a sense of mystery to them as well. And we've got an ancient past. There's a lot of, like, old prehistoric stones, and people think there are ley lines that crisscross the area as well. But I lived in Scunthorpe, which is in the northeast, and it's so it was handy for me to be able to investigate cases in Leeds and Bradford and Hull and Sheffield, were all of sort of within a sort of hour or so driving range. And it was in the sort of mid to late 70s I was doing most of the cases that are in the book. Um, Part of that was due to the fact that the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind came
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
and that was a huge film that came out. I suppose it was, I think in Britain it came out after Star Wars, and Star Wars made a massive impact. And then Close Encounters came out. It came out a few months after it was released in America. It came out in sort of March 1978 in Britain, but all the media fanfare about it meant that people were more likely to report their experiences.
They felt
And
more comfortable to say
yeah,
something. Yeah.
I think, oh, something like that happened to me. So there's an organization called the UFO Investigators Network.
Is that MUFON?
It was called UFO-in.
Oh,
It was
okay. Here, there's one
special,
called MUFON in the
yeah,
United
move
States,
on, yeah.
Mutual
Yeah,
UFO.
into
Yeah.
UFO network. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a similar setup, and it was almost. I think it was set up due to this wave of new information, and that I suppose ufologists in the past had investigated lights in the sky and so what you call sort of fairly average sightings and things. It
Hmm.
was only in the 70s people kind of acknowledge that there might be high strangeness cases, that involve
Why do you call it high strangeness? I
mainly
love that
because
word, but I don't know why it's
I'm
used.
throwing it around here, but I think it's because it involves more than just a UFO sighting, but it will involve people experiencing poltergeist activity or seeing figures in their bedroom or, men in black or
Hmm.
several examples. People saw unusual people in the streets that they couldn't figure out that they were kind of human. They looked human, but they
Hmm.
knew or felt that they were aliens of some sort. In plain sight. And
Yeah. What do
because
you
one of my
think about that?
um,
Think that aliens have taken human bodies or human forms?
Yeah, I think that's something that's in the literature and in the cases I investigate. There's one example I give in my book where this woman in France on holiday, I think it was in 1974, um, she saw this really tall man, and he seemed very unusual, and he was wearing like thick, um, heavy boots, and it was sort of summer in France, so he was wearing unusual clothing and acting strangely, and he looked like one of his classic Nordic aliens. He had blonde hair, I think blue eyes, and she just thought he was a sort of a person that didn't seem to quite in
Hmm.
the fit in that situation. And I've got a more bizarre one of Paula Green, who said she also saw a sort of blonde-haired figure, but it seemed like a cardboard cutout. He seemed almost like a cartoon character. He didn't have any wrinkles or lines on his face, and he had a suit, sort of V-shaped outfit that seemed pristine with large shoulder pads, things sticking out. And this character um, held her hand and she kind of closed her eyes and she got the sensation she was flying in the air with him, like Lewis Lane with
Oh,
Superman,
yeah. Yeah.
Superman movie. And that was one of her weird experiences, but I don't
Hmm.
think she opened her eyes, so she only got the sensation of a wind blowing through her hair or something.
Right.
And strangely enough, I was surfing the internet a couple of days ago and I actually saw a report on Reddit where somebody had said they'd seen some alien character or entity that looked like a cardboard cutout. And I thought, that's really strange because I'd forgotten Paula Green had told me about her encounter. It's only when I kind of looked through my book again, I thought, that's really strange because that's a really odd thing to describe an alien. Yeah, it's bad enough
Yeah.
saying the source of an alien with a funny hat and funny boots or something, but to say they didn't even look three-dimensional is something you wouldn't think you'd come across again,
Hmm.
really. And I think this sort of thing seems to crop up though when somebody tells you about something that you think, oh, that sounds really incredible, and then you flick through a few books or something, and then you find, it's not as rare as you think,
Right.
and
But
I
it
think,
seems to have gone quiet,
yeah,
for a while, where people either weren't reporting or not seeing it, or I'm not quite sure. But it seems to have gone quiet.
yeah, I think. Like with alien abductions, were kind of all the rage in the 90s. There was books by Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, John Mack, and it became almost like a credible subject. And
Mhm.
they were saying millions of people have been abducted and all that sort of thing. And it was quite a sensation. But since then, you don't really hear that much of alien abductions, and you don't really hear much about close encounters of a third kind. That's where somebody sees a UFO land and an occupant come outside, and I think that's kind of strange. Those sort of cases have died off because when I first became interested in the subject in the 1970s, I thought, oh, it's logical that spaceships would come and you'd get aliens investigating our planet, taking samples and things. And a lot of UFO cases in the UFO magazines always seem to have aliens in spacesuits with helmets and breathing apparatus, and looked like an
Our,
astronaut.
well, yeah, our astronauts. And that is
Yeah,
the other thing. There are people who really believe that, and they're credible people. They're not just,
yeah,
they've done research and everything else, and they really believe it's military.
yeah.
That one guy in particular that I interviewed a couple of years ago, he researched a bunch of the smaller sightings, not the
Yeah.
major ones, the smaller ones, and he firmly believed that at least the United States, but he thinks maybe all of human nature has figured out how to beat gravity and
All right.
in the early 60s.
All
And he
right.
said, can you imagine, though, if that's the case, how you'd feel as an astronaut in like
Yeah.
67 and 69 on top of all this fuel, and they're going to blast you in space
Yeah.
through the gravity, and they already know how to beat gravity.
Yeah.
And what was lost, the research and the just how far ahead humans would be
Mm.
if they had shared the information,
Yeah.
if this had been public information. Now, what do you think of that? Do you
Yeah. I
think
think
it's true or?
I'm sort of skeptical, to be honest, but there are these lots of stories that were, I think they call them my labs, military intelligence sort of operations. And there's people I think even in the 60s were claiming that the stories of the contactees like George Adamski were perhaps they were being manipulated by the government,
Mhm.
and that they might have even been drugged by them and um, helped make up a kind of alien scenario, and sort of were tricking these people. But on the
Right.
other hand, the FBI was investigating these people because they were spreading stories about aliens saying that we should all love each other and we should have cashless societies and ban the bomb and things. So uh, they had a philosophy that went against capitalism and
Hmm.
which was anti-American really, and sounded too much like communist propaganda. So
Yeah.
you could say there's quite a lot of tension really, and you could even think, foreign assets like the Soviets or something could encourage people to believe things that were in line with their philosophy,
Hmm.
and it opens an old can of worms really there. And it's also interesting that one of the first important abduction cases was of Anthony Villas-Boas in Brazil, where he was sort of dragged from his tractor late at night and taken into this flying saucer where he was seduced by a space woman. And there again, the aliens that captured him were all wearing like spacesuits and breathing apparatus. And even in the room he was put in with the alien woman, I think he felt some sort of gases or something like to equalize the atmosphere between him and the alien woman. Well, that story has also been um, regarded by some people as being a scenario created by the American government, but it was an American helicopter that landed and they dragged him into the helicopter and then kind of drugged him or put him in some sort of altered state of consciousness or something and played out this scenario with him. But um, and also that the Americans might have done this on other occasions, but then it seems like an elaborate thing to do to
I'm
fly.
thinking why?
Yeah, yeah. Why?
Why,
Why would you
that's a
do?
lot of work
Yeah,
for what reason,
for no particular reason.
Yeah,
And
yeah. That's
but
kind of weird.
but there are lots of stories of people saying they've been abducted by a combination of aliens and human military advisors, or there's military bases like Dorch base where we've got underground chambers where aliens live in one area
Hmm.
and humans, so military live elsewhere. And there's some sort of collaboration
What do you
between
think about all that?
I think they're just they're, they're interesting stories, but they're very hard to substantiate
Hmm.
because I think another thing is that there's lots of different government departments and agencies, and there is a lot of um, you could say deception going on. Some agencies might want to promote UFOs to hide the fact that they're testing aircraft,
Hmm.
secret stealth aircraft. Even the CIA has admitted that in the sort of 60s, a lot of UFOs seen by airline pilots were created by U-2 spy planes that flew a lot higher at
Hmm.
altitude, and then another explanation of a Thomas Mantle case where he flew too close to a UFO and lost consciousness and crashed. And there again, that's explained later as a top secret balloon, high altitude balloon. And so, and that's another explanation for Roswell. But in a way, you could say it helps government to have UFOs to hide. Uh,
What they're doing,
yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah.
on the other hand, uh, the CIA had the Robertson panel, and I think it was the early 50s, and they wanted to cut down on UFO sightings because they felt it clogged their lines of intelligence. So, they wanted to know if Soviet missiles were going to enter American airspace. So if lots of people keep reporting silly UFOs and that, it's just going to clog up their information channels.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there was a kind of deliberate attempt then to kind of suppress UFO sightings and to explain them. And I think a lot of ufologists in America kind of bore a kind of grudge about that, that explanations came too easily to them. So it didn't really serve the cause of truth really any
Right.
good. And then you get a few odd people who worked for government agencies that have spread misinformation. And you could say there's quite a few ex-military people now that go on YouTube and lots of TV documentaries, things like Skinwalker Ranch and
Hmm.
other documentaries like this, where you think, if these CIA people know so much about the subject, why are they doing TV programs instead of having sort of scientific consortiums or presenting, you know, real physical evidence. And that's the whole thing about the subject. Say, just in terms of nuts and bolts, the physical evidence always seems to be lacking. When fragments do turn up, the analysis of them can be quite ambiguous, or like some fragments of what was called a UFO just turned out to be waste slag, and or it could be meteor fragments instead of spaceship
Hmm.
fragments.
Would
And
we recognize it though? I mean, if we've got a fragment of something
yeah,
and we don't know what it is,
yeah,
would we recognize it as being a UFO
exactly. Yeah,
fragment?
yeah, if you had something truly extraterrestrial, would our scientific methods be able to actually identify it as, uh, in any way, really? So it's difficult because I've seen quite a few these reports you get from laboratories about analysis, and really they don't, unless you're a scientist, are really hard to understand, and also it depends on what type of tests they do on it and that sort of thing. But I've come across a really interesting case of a UFO that allegedly crashed in Wales about 40 odd years ago.
Hmm.
And there again, there was lots of green cellulite like sheets of material that the local farmers said had been collected by the RAF of some mysterious military people, and they just came and took everything. But a few fragments were left over, and a ufologist kept them for about 20 years and
Hmm.
didn't really speak much about them. And he was really fearful that the government would, grab them and take them off his hands. So what
Right.
he did was put them in key fobs and sell them to ufologists so that the government couldn't get hold of them. But the trouble is, the analysis of these fragments seemed to suggest they were terrestrial.
Hmm.
And one person, only within the last few months, looked up the old newspaper reports, and he found a newspaper report that mentions an aircraft losing a part of its wing
Uh-huh.
uh, at that location, and he thinks it was actually this part of a wing that had fallen off on this property. And then when he contacted the RAF base where this United States Air Force jet was stationed, they looked through the records and they actually identified the aircraft and its serial number, and that it had actually had lost this part of its wing. It was still able to fly back to base, but in a way, this shadowy, like, oh, it was a UFO and these
Hmm.
sinister figures came. Meant that there wasn't any real public inquiry into it. I think if it had been in a more populated area, there might have been more people, looking around for this. But it sort of helped them to have this kind of rumor that, oh, it was a
But why wouldn't the
UFO crash.
government come
Yeah,
out and just, make it common knowledge,
yeah,
that we went onto this farm, we picked up all the pieces from a
yeah,
wing that had fallen off a plane
yeah.
or whatever,
But, but
you know.
it's a bit difficult when it's the United States Air Force aircraft because people, they might be agreeable to an RAF plane, but perhaps, if it's a kind of foreign aircraft, they might be a bit more belligerent about it. Um, because there was this thing about Greenham Common, women in particular were protesting against the deployment of cruise missiles in Britain by the United
Hmm.
States. So there's
Right.
this sort of anti-American thing going on about them carrying out military activities.
No, so
Um,
they didn't want to activate that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're digging up an hornet's nest that you don't really want to
Well,
do.
based on everything you've told me, do you believe in UFOs?
I think that's it's a good one because I think when I first got interested, I did believe there were spaceships and that, it would be practical that aliens would come. But I suppose when I read the works of Jacques Vallée and John Keel, they showed how impossible it could be that these were actually, spaceships coming. I think if we were solid craft, however well advanced, I think we'd detect them more often, and that a lot of the reports of kind of strange entities, that float above the ground, often react in a very strange manner, and that they come and go and often sort of just might even vanish. And also, a lot of their research found that people don't just see a UFO, but they're enmeshed in a lot of other experiences surrounding that, the UFO encounter. They'll start experiencing coincidences or poltergeist activity or even ghostly activity. And some people who see a UFO will often remember childhood experiences of seeing balls of light in their bedroom or outside their bedroom curtains.
Mhm.
So sometimes people have a kind or whole groups of families have all these weird experiences. And so I think there is, things are going on, but whether I think pinning down to what this actually is something else. Like Keel and Valley tend to think that there's some intelligence working that that sort of exists in parallel with our own world, that they can merge with us whenever they feel like it, and that they can sort of manipulate our minds and manipulate reality, I suppose you'd call it.
But who is this? Is this aliens or is this our own government?
They- yeah, well, they pinned it on, aliens or what John Keel called ultra-terrestrials that could
Hmm.
move through the super spectrum, and he said they could move through the spectrum so that they could come into the part of the spectrum that we can perceive, but we could also move out of it. Um, But in a way, I feel like it's just put a new label on an old subject,
Yeah.
that's just as exotic as an alien spaceship. In fact,
Hmm.
it's even more exotic, really. And so,
Yes. Yeah.
so it is a bit frustrating having answers to what's going on. And I think there's either that idea that there's something out there impinging on us, but I think something I was more quite more interested in over time was the fact that there are a lot of social and cultural factors, and the type of things people experience tend to reflect their own personality and what their own interests and sort of desires or fears, really. So if somebody's sort of fearful of these sort of things, they tend to get the more fearful sort of reptoid aliens and, threatening aliens. There's a couple of men in my book who have quite horrifying encounters and have these apocalyptic visions and things, and the aliens seem to be quite dangerous to them.
Mhm.
And so, and yet other people in my book see it as a positive experience, and that, the aliens are here to help us and guide us over. And, one of them writes about the aliens being millions of years ahead of us, and that they've been present in our past history as well, so that we're almost like a presence throughout history, really, and the future, and that we're almost like kind of time travelers that can come and try to put us in one with our own universe and mind. So she was a bit more into kind of getting these impressions in meditative states and doing sort of, she almost wrote this book about them in a, almost like having automatic writing. She got this sort of impressions
Download.
from
Yeah.
them, yeah, and
Yeah.
she'd write them down, and she did a few drawings of them. One of the drawings is of a faceless alien with radiating light with like a little breathing mask on its face,
Hmm.
and yet it didn't have any hands, so it's almost like it's a combination of almost like what I call an angel astronaut, really. That it's
Yeah.
something, that sort of
Hybrid,
radiated
a
light.
hybrid.
Yeah, hybrid, yeah.
But in caves, there are there are cave paintings, in
All right.
my understanding, that seem to show aliens. Well,
All
looks
right.
like aliens.
Yeah.
And these are carbon dated as being very old. And
Yeah.
they seem to be very comfortable in society, live among people.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think it's possible because um, I think with the writings of Valley or even Eric von Daniken, the reference the Bible with visions occurring in the sky and
Hmm.
things, and I suppose humanity in general tends to see powerful gods and influences coming from the heavens, from above, and heaven or whatever these places are, but not necessarily a sort of planet or anything. It's almost like we're, we're just coming from some place that you can't really identify. I don't think anyone's actually tried to pin down where exactly is heaven. It's just
Yeah.
something we assume it's out there beyond our reach. It fills the whole universe,
Hmm.
and so I think it wouldn't be surprising if people even way back thousands of years interpreted, say, things in the sky in the same, well, not in the same way as us, but with um, with astonishment and to have explanations for it. That these things in the sky are aliens or gods or
But they're not only pictures of things in the sky, they're pictures of beings walking
oh
with
yeah,
them
yeah,
that, that clearly look what we would
yeah,
call an alien.
yeah,
Now, unless we've taken that picture and that has become our picture of being an alien,
yeah,
and they were just tall people from another country
yeah,
wearing weird costumes.
yeah,
But they seem to be very much integrated into the society.
yeah. Yeah, and I think also you had these shamans who also,
Hmm.
traveled through the unconscious mind and encountered
That's
unusual
true. Yeah.
entities and things. And in a way, that could be part of it as well. In fact, somebody who reviewed my Portraits of Alien Encounters book when it first came out in 1990, he was saying like Paul Bennett, who had a lot of different UFO experiences and things. He said he was almost like a childhood shaman, like if he grew up in some sort of village or something, he'd be the local shaman. And there
Hmm.
is that kind of aspect to it that I don't think's been really sort of investigated very deeply by ufologists. But
Right.
like you say, lots of other cultures have other weird alien experiences that they might interpret in terms of their own cultural values. And in the past, you know, perhaps there were these similar encounters or experiences. Um, Certainly, past art seems to indicate that. And that's another thing that somebody's put forward, that in a way, um, people who encounter UFOs or have extensive experiences are almost like working out their own imagination and fantasies in a kind of artistic fashion, that they're using the kind of UFO mythology as a way of interpreting things beyond our ken, really. So, that's another aspect of it. I think,
Hmm.
like if you look at art and
It's like
surrealism,
a common, Carl Jung called it something like almost like a common dream or
Yeah,
common consciousness.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he talks about the UFO as being a round symbolic image, that it encompasses, I suppose, everything. And that he also, I think, tells a story of meeting three men in black in
Hmm.
some one of his books, and he was a really early kind of I wouldn't say student of ufology, but he was quick to observe the importance of a subject,
Yeah.
and from a not from this over spaceships or whatever, he seemed to think that they could be a product of our minds, because after the Second World War, people were traumatized, and these were kind of symbols of trauma, or
Hmm.
the round symbol of a flying disc could be something that we're placing our own fears and expectations on. But he looked at it from, a sort of psychoanalytical point of view,
Right.
but he did acknowledge that they could actually be solid as well, that these things could almost be perhaps creations of our mind, not just imagination, but something that takes on a kind of physical presence. And I think that's what some ufologists tend to think, that it's not only not just a psychological thing, that there's something solid beyond that.
Hmm.
But I think that's the hardest part to really determine, because say alien abductions, they do tend to take place either on a lonely road at night or in somebody's bedroom, and then you've got factors like sleep paralysis,
Hmm.
and and the fact that if people are hypnotically regressed, um, there's a tendency then for false memories to be introduced. I think, hypnosis can have its uses, but I think some ufologists like Bud Hopkins or even John Keel were a bit too eager to use it, because they're a bit too more eager to get information out of people rather than to have a therapeutic, word
Remedy.
with them. Yeah, yeah, remedy. Because,
Hmm.
and I think hypnotic regression is good for people who want it, and perhaps to help. To help them cope with these sort of memories or trauma. I think that's how, with the Betty and Barney Hill case,
Hmm.
Barney Hill had a lot of trauma and was hypnotically regress, not because he'd had an abduction experience, but because he
A
needed a
place
bit
to
of
escape,
therapy. Yeah.
almost. Yeah. What about, are you familiar with Phoenix Lights, 1997?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, now that was observed by, they estimate 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And that, and they all kind of said the same thing.
Yeah.
And one thing they said, and you'll hear from a lot of UFO people, everything goes quiet.
All right.
Very still. There are no birds, nothing. Everything goes
Okay.
very
Yeah.
still, as if it's, even the air itself has stopped.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of UFOs seen by about 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Government did come in and try to say, oh, well, it was just, balloons, all this. And they could
Yeah.
not reproduce it. It was crazy in
Yeah.
a way. You had
Yeah.
too many people. What do you think that was?
Um, I'm not really sure, because sometimes, like when you get these meteor showers, you
Hmm.
get, hundreds of people reporting them, and sometimes some people have different perceptions of what they saw. They see it. Some say they saw it lasting, several minutes, some for seconds. So you do have that ambiguity of human,
Hmm.
perception and how they report. But I feel like there's something that must have triggered those sightings, and that's something worth looking into. And even if it was, say, government aircraft dropping flares or whatever it was, why hasn't that sort of thing been triggered before or after?
Well, they
Why?
couldn't reproduce it either. I
Yeah,
mean, and it
yeah,
really, from what I read, it made no sense. They were
yeah,
coming out with stupid stuff.
yeah. I think,
But so
yeah.
many people not only saw it, but it was close enough for them to see really the underbelly of
All right.
these,
Well,
ships, I guess you
yeah,
call them,
yeah,
and they defied gravity.
yeah.
That's the other thing where they could stop still and then take off in a blink,
Okay,
or
yeah.
they could disappear, you know.
Um, that's a bit like the UAPs of today. They've been rebranded from UFOs to unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And there again, they've been identified as having high speeds,
Hmm.
fast acceleration, and the ability to enter the sea. And that they've also got this psychological impact on people. It can, have some sort of effect on people to have, nightmares or to change their perception on
Right.
things.
But
And so,
10,000 people.
yeah, yeah,
How do you explain that away? And then
yeah.
again, a number of people videoed it. It
All right,
wasn't,
yeah,
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 I mean, it wasn't just, well, we got together and
yeah.
decided, 10,000 people is a lot.
But,
And,
but
some people say, well, it's military and they
yeah,
don't want it known. But again,
yeah,
if military, if we can beat gravity,
yeah,
why are we sending up rockets with
yeah,
all of that fuel the way we are?
yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of wastage. Um, I think that's the thing, though. It's hard getting to the bottom of these things because like I said, there's different government agencies, and there's like secrets and lies on
Hmm.
secrets and lies. So I think for us civilians, it's really hard to get to the nub
The
of it.
truth of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the truth of it, um, and perhaps some things have been discovered that are sort of forgotten and put away and not adapted. Lots of things go on for different reasons. People have their own agendas,
Hmm.
um, and I think a lot of secret projects have gone on that we're unaware of, and I think Lockheed Martin has been accused of being responsible behind all these UAP sightings, which some people have taken on board. But Lockheed Martin has also been implicated with creating other sort of uh, vehicle, aerial vehicles that surpass anything produced elsewhere and
Hmm.
not revealed to the public. So I think that's another thing. It's not just government, military. There's a lot of civilian organizations
Right. But
work
if
on.
we can beat gravity, I mean
Mm,
that's huge.
that would be,
Yeah, and these aircraft seem to defy gravity.
yeah,
They seem to do things that, at speeds too,
yeah,
that, even hidden.
yeah,
Why, especially with all the wars going on, why wouldn't we trot these things out?
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I mean, we're coming out with 1940, not we, but in the
yeah,
world, you see pictures of 1940 tanks. And if we
mm,
have these things that defy
yeah,
gravity,
yeah,
what are we doing? You
yeah. It
know,
doesn't make sense, does it? Really?
not at
What's
all.
going on?
Not at all. And if we've learned to defy gravity 50 or 60 years ago
Yeah,
and not use that technology to move forward in the world, how much opportunity has been lost?
yeah.
you know. And then again, how many people have been lost that we're putting them into space capsules? You
Yeah,
know, it's like putting them into a horse and carriage to, you know, go across the United States when we've got
yeah,
high speed cars. Why would we do
yeah,
that? You
yeah,
know? So that's the thing I don't understand really. When it comes to military, you know, we like to keep secrets, but can we keep a secret like that for 50, 60
yeah,
years? And the
yeah,
second thing is why?
yeah.
You know, why do that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for governments to keep things secret, but
Yeah, I
having
don't
said
think they're
that,
that good either, to be honest. You
there's,
know,
there's a
yeah, I
bit
mean, they
leaky.
are, there are some secrets they can keep pretty well, but, you know, secrets like this, I don't know, would it come out, I think, in
Yeah,
50 years?
yeah. Well, it's funny. I've written for Fortean Times about these deathbed confessions and whistleblowers, but there
Hmm.
is a lot of some of them repeat the same stories, and some aren't very consistent. And that's another factor about military people. Some have said they've seen secret for being taken into a room on their own and being shown secret documents, showing pictures of aliens and crash saucers and things, and that another said they've seen film of alien autopsies and things like that, and it makes you wonder whether sometimes these people were being tested because if they presented somebody with all this incredible information, they'd know if they leaked it, they'd be able to track it back to them quite easily because
Right.
it was fake information, if you know what I mean. But
Hmm.
then again, perhaps then people might think, well, isn't that what the government might do to cover up? We really do have that information. So I think there's a whole of mirrors involved with ufology, really, and I
Right.
think I think that's why I tend to be on the skeptical side of things because I think you've got to have some perspective on the subject and and because I live in Britain and it's something that British and European ufologists have a bit more skepticism because a lot of things do seem to occur in America, and even with a British Rendlesham, Rendlesham Forest incident, it involved American service personnel, and so it seems something like America has a monopoly on this sort of thing.
Right. We're more fanciful, you're
Yeah.
thinking.
Although, yeah, there are some really brilliant researchers and skeptical researchers in America. It's
Hmm.
just that they're not heard as much because I think the problem is a lot of UFO documentaries just have a positive side of things and we don't look at, other angles or explanations. They'd rather, ask, is it aliens and leave that up in the air without really exploring it more because like we were saying, I think you can explore lots of different areas of a subject, and even if there's nothing real there, it should tell us a lot about human psychology, perception, our own society and culture, and how we perceive the strange. So I think from that angle, it's intriguing and could be scientifically done. So I think because I suppose because I'm not trying to prove anything and not a total believer, I think
Hmm.
it's better to be like that, and then you can explore all options really. So it's
Right.
sitting on the fence really, and
Is that
having
where you are? Because I
a,
kind of get the impression after 55 years of investigation, you do not believe in UFOs, that you believe that this is really, you know, unknown, that our mind will try to give a story to,
yeah,
you know, that is just beyond our knowledge or, you know,
yeah,
something weird we've seen and or trauma, you
yeah.
know, traumas.
I've called myself an optimistic skeptic, and
Hmm.
that I'd like it to be real, but I, the other side of my brain said, "Oh no, it can't be." So, but
Yeah.
there I think there are strange things that do go on in your lives. Like everybody has a kind of weird experience, or everybody's seen something strange in the sky, or had some sort of paranormal experience. So I think there are things we don't understand, and just to label things, say as sleep paralysis or pure fantasy, I think that's a bit of a lazy option. Why does this sheer fantasy take the shape of seeing, 12-foot high robots, or men in black? Why is it like that? Carl
Yeah.
Jung said, we've got archetypal images that we all perceive through all time and cultures, but we give them, I suppose, different names, but we all take on a different role in in our psyche.
Hmm.
And so I think his work's quite even now still worth reading, because he has quite a lot of insights into kind of the psychology of UFO sightings, particularly when he was writing in the Cold War era, because in a way, a lot of the reports, not only from the contactees but from other UFO witnesses, seem to reflect that people were frightened of an alien menace, and in a way, it was a kind of metaphor for, the menace from the Soviet Union,
Right.
and also the fear. We just had a Second World War and the atomic bomb, so I think with and jet aircraft and new rockets and all this
Hmm.
technology of warfare, people were very frightened that even if we didn't have a war, we could destroy the world through our own endeavors, really. So there was a
Right.
lot.
We keep trying.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
keep
and like,
trying. Yeah.
and that was very much like now we're frightened of AI and drones and
Hmm.
uh, new technology. So I think that's another dimension, really, that there's always these technological step forwards that bring advances, but also bring, us closer to exterminating ourselves as well. You know,
Right, right. We do seem to go to that edge a lot of
yeah,
times, and
yeah,
so far, thank God we've pulled back,
no, yeah.
or stumbled back.
Yeah,
Let me put it that way. I don't give human nature that much credit.
no,
But it is interesting. I mean, I can't get past Phoenix Lights. That many people saying the same thing. I'm
yeah,
not sure, honestly, that it wasn't military.
yeah,
That it wasn't a military situation, but apparently, military bases did, send up aircraft at that point.
yeah. To
Like it went
investigate.
into an
Yeah,
alarm. But
yeah,
then again, one side of the military doesn't tell the other side what they're doing.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the one that kind of, how do I talk that away?
Yeah,
You
it's like
know?
this wave of drone sightings at the
Hmm.
end of last year. Um, I know a lot of people operate drones and there's military drones, but it didn't seem to explain why so many people in sort of concentrated areas were seeing so many drones. I think some people saw quite big ones, I think people reported seeing something the size of a,
They were
yeah,
actually that was last November. Thanks for bringing that up.
yeah,
I forgot about that. Um, but that wasn't a weird thing that never had an explanation.
no,
And that was all over New York, New Jersey. I mean, well populated
yeah.
areas. And
And
there were a lot of them. A lot
and,
of them.
and
And
also,
I have no idea what that was. Do you?
no. No, and also about the same time, there was a similar wave of drones in England near an RAF base. I think there's been some information about that published recently. So it's funny that there's this kind of what I suppose ufologists call a sort of wave or a flap of sightings. And this seems to happen a lot. You get one or two really good sightings that seem to trigger more and more people to report
Right,
seeing
right.
something. And invariably, you'll get somebody coming out and saying, oh, it's Venus or it's this or it's a drone, and then the newspapers start to be skeptical, and then the whole thing dies off, and
Hmm.
then people forget about it until another wave comes along. Something happened before the First World War in Britain in 1909 and 1913. People um, in Britain, like hundreds of people saw lights in the sky and thought they were German airships. A lot of these sightings were on the East Coast and in areas where they felt vulnerable to attack from any German invasion forces.
Yeah.
So those flats were, I suppose, interpreted in terms of war nerves. People were really frightened of the impact German airships would have on a future war. And there again, that was new technology having an impact on people, and um, people actually reporting seeing cigar-shaped carriages with people inside them beneath a sort of balloon envelope. And there were a few British airships about at that time, but they wouldn't really be flying about at night over cities. They didn't have
Hmm.
that sort of capability. But you did then have the newspapers were all excited about it, and it was kind of promoted by politicians who wanted better defences against um, aircraft, building anti-aircraft guns and
Right.
sort of building up our own air force to defend ourselves. So it was a kind of political thing as well, and the newspapers were eager to do for publicity for that. But then when it got a bit out of hand, they then started publishing skeptical
Yeah. Try to manage
stories
it.
saying,
Yeah.
oh, light seen last night was a kite with a light on it, or boys play prank on policemen, or something like that. And then it kind of like there's this steep rise in sightings, and then it's usually killed off either through lack of interest or it's stamped on by some explanation. But then you think, what created the thing that triggered it and why then, I suppose the
Hmm.
explanation then
But
was,
using all of those ideas, what happened in 2024, at the end of 2024, with all those drones? I
yeah,
mean, no explanation came out
no,
from anybody.
no. I think
You
that
know,
the thing,
and there were pictures. It wasn't, like, you go back to 1913, 1909,
yeah,
you can get one person saying it, and then that newspaper reports it, and another newspaper
yeah,
reports it, and it can take on from there. But
yeah,
now,
yeah,
we've got a million people with a million cameras
yeah,
aiming at this,
yeah,
and it's kind of hard to pretend that, well, it was just one person or it was a remote area.
yeah.
And there was never an explanation to it.
No, and the thing is, these things get the headlines and mainstream media attention, but then other things go on. There's an air crash, or there's a
Oh, yeah,
war
people move
wars going
on.
on. Yeah,
Yeah,
people move on, and I
right.
think the average person might think, "Oh, I vaguely remember that, but wasn't that all
Well, I told you
clones or
myself, and
something?"
I was in that area at the time. I was in the New York metro area in November and December, and believe
Yeah.
me, people were very upset
All
about
right.
all of these flying objects.
All right.
And some of them were as big as cars. They said,
Yeah.
some are small, but some are very big.
Yeah.
And one general, is what I've read, who knows what's true, came out and said, they're just coming in from the ocean. It's like they come up from the ocean
All
and
right.
just swarm.
Yeah.
And, nobody knows what they are. And President Biden just straight out said, I don't know. And
Well,
how and then it sounded to me as if our military, they went too low. Our
yeah.
military couldn't get
Yeah.
involved. And it was weird. And now
Actually,
that we're talking, it's even more
yeah,
weird
yeah,
that it just went dead quiet. And
yeah.
everybody walked away with a shrug of, don't know what that was.
But it's also history repeating itself because in New Zealand they had a similar airship scare, and they
Hmm.
were saying, and because they are a long way from Germany, they said it
Right.
was German ships launching airships to them, and I think there might have been one or two rumors of ships off the English coast launching
Hmm.
airships as well. So nothing's really new, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is true. So,
But
we need to close, but before we close, I'm going to ask you after 55 years of research,
I don't.
do you believe in UFOs?
I believe there's such a thing as UFO sightings and the own mythology of it, but I,
Let me ask
I
a
don't-
different way.
but
Do you believe in aliens?
um, not aliens visiting us now.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, I guess. UFOs are just unidentified flying
Yeah,
objects. You
we
know, that can
don't
be
know.
a drone coming over my house and I don't know where it came from. So that was
Perhaps
too big a question.
perhaps I'm just a slow learner.
Well, 55 years of investigation, I would say, you're up on it. Yeah.
I do, I
Well,
do.
thanks so much for being on the show.
Okay,
And it's
thank
been
you.
great, really, to hear the
Yeah,
other side because
okay.
most of the time I'm hearing people who are, all in,
Yeah.
and I'm not hearing the other side that
Mm,
research is showing this or, the skeptic
yeah.
side or
Yeah.
the other side of it. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
And
right. Thank you
you
very
want to
much.
tell everybody where they can get your book and, if you have anything coming up you'd like to share?
Um, yes, it's available on Amazon and most of the, book
You want to give
retailer.
the full name again? Sorry.
It's Paranormal Perspectives, Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited.
Mhm.
And, I think I'm really pleased with it because it does bring together a lot of reports and stories that even obscure UFO magazines don't contain. So I think it's something that would be of interest to people, beyond Britain as well, just to show that strange things happen elsewhere, not just in the United States. And I think it's almost like a universal thing that these things have been going on. I've only covered the 70s and 80s, but these things they, they go on everywhere and they kind of evolve with what people expect to see, if you know what I mean,
Yeah,
shaped by
yeah.
the
And the
media.
timing and the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
Great. Thanks. And then do you want people to get hold of you or are you going into hiding after this?
well, I've got a, I've got a Facebook page, and they can contact me on my. I've got a Gmail address. That's nigelwatson1@gmail.com. So they
Okay.
can always write to me. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
always happy to hear anyone's experiences or anything.
Right. Okay, great. Nigel, thanks so much for being on the
Okay,
show, and I really do appreciate your view
right.
on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
All right.
bye.
Yeah, bye.